All right, for our second topic today, we wanted to take a look the LPGA, which is Women's Professional Golf, and then also the USGA, U.S. Golf Association. They're the golf administrating body. They announced gender policy updates recently, and essentially the long and the short of it is that to compete in women's divisions, you have to either be assigned female at birth or have transitioned to a female before going through male puberty. And so this has created, I wouldn't say too much of an uproar, but people have taken note. This is a definitive statement in terms of, okay, here is an objective rule that we're going to try to look at and use and so forth. So wanted to get your reaction on this. I mean, this is an issue that people are trying to figure out, well, presumably either trying to figure out how we can do stuff that's fair for people, or I guess some people just want to be mean, but other people are trying to legitimately figure out how can we be fair, fair to everybody. And so what do you think of the attempt of the golf governing bodies right here that we have to try to create a workable system?
No, this is an interesting topic because I think this shows that from a cultural level, this transgender topic, which is new to our society generally, is beginning to evolve. And like you said about it's kind of, this example is the LPGA specifically, but it's like, okay, now we're going to have that patchwork of different parts of our culture and our society here being a golf organization and the sports world, trying to, like you said, account for how to be fair to everybody, right? Just people want to be fair to people with transgender and allow them to compete, but also be fair to the cisgender athletes and not have some sort of unfair competition, with one of the members being maybe having some advantages with extra testosterone or whatever the case is. And I think that, this to me seems like a fair way to try and, like you said, without being mean and without still trying to have an open mind type of attitude, but saying, hey, we do need to have some guardrails on how we select people to compete in this sport. And what does that mean? So again, it's I think one thing that I was glad to see, and just before I hand it back, I will just quote from the article that we're using here as a backdrop. It says, quote, a working group comprising experts in medicine, science, sports physiology, golf performance, and gender policy law determined that effects of male puberty confer competitive advantages in golfer performance compared to players who have not undergone male puberty. That to me was like, okay, they actually had a good group of well-rounded people that seem professionally to have been in the type of place where you'd want people looking at this stuff versus traditionally in our discourse about this topic and many other topics, but this one for this discussion, who do we normally hear from? We hear from talk show hosts and politicians who generally aren't experts in golf performance, sports physiology, and medicine and science.
And people whose incentives are to get as much attention as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like,
not to be
that's
right,
what I meant by this is kind of like the evolution of it, because it's like, okay, now we got serious people are looking at this stuff and saying, okay, how can we really do this? And that's what I mean. It's so to me, it's more like, all right, we're now maybe past the shock stage that this exists. And now we finally have, more grown-up people saying, okay, this exists, it's not going away. Now let's try and put a kind of framework together of maybe how both trans people can be assimilated and feel that they're part of society, but also that everyone else doesn't feel like they're somehow being allowed to get some unfair advantage that everyone else doesn't. And,
and that's
welcome to affirmative action.
Oh my gosh, that's one of those. You can throw that out there. That
might have a whole nother show.
yeah, but no, I think that you're correct. I mean, in the sense that this is trying to establish something objective that addresses the wants of, let's say trans athletes that want to compete in the women's division versus also trying to be fair to the women that are in the women's division already. I guess the cisgender women, the women who assigned at birth that are in that women's division already. And when I look at these things, I always go back to the idea of like, why did society create women's sports? And a lot of times, if we don't, we might think of what's happening with these disputes over trans participation in women's sports, we might think of that as analogous to maybe segregation or the color line in baseball. Like, well, why did they create, why did they stop, blacks from competing in the Major League Baseball, and then they had to create a Negro League? Well, why did that happen? And when you look at that, it's like, okay, well, that was discriminatory. The goal was the whites only was expressly to keep blacks out. Like that's why it was created. I don't think we have an analogy here in this situation where like the people who created and propagated women's divisions in these sports, the goal at the time was not let's keep trans people out. Like that wasn't part of the discussion. The goal was, or the purpose was, that women are at a disadvantage. Once you get a certain age, women are at a disadvantage competing in men's sports. If you're looking at if you look at the high end, the women's world records for track and for any sport, swimming, all that stuff, are lower, or I guess are less, or they're like, lower, higher. I mean, the time is higher. It's a slower time. The women's 100 record.
Basically, they would be 100. Beat by men in most physical activities if they had to compete.
Exactly. At the high end. Yeah. No, that's at the high end. It's like, oh, well, what about at the high end? We're not judging everybody by Olympic athletes. If a man is a second faster than a woman in a 100-meter dash, that doesn't. The median is also the same. Like across the board, the median is the men are higher or better, so to speak, at these things on a median level than the women. And so we created a women's division to have the full range of competition there. And so it is a big ask. I say all that to say, not to say that we should that's the end of the discussion. I think we should acknowledge it's a big ask to say, hey, people who were assigned male at birth, they want to compete with women. That's a big ask. That's not just saying, oh, just take down the color barrier and, there's no need to separate people that are, all men or all, whatever. And so that it's a big ask. I think that I'll say this, and I'll get back. I want to kick it to you though, but I think that what the golf governing bodies here are doing is constructive. And so I'm happy that what they're doing is constructive because as you said, it's kind of a next stage in kind of the shock or whatever. Like, I do worry that this may miss the mark from an unintended consequences standpoint, simply because you set this benchmark of puberty, then that does necessarily mean that you got to have minors go get medical gender affirming care. I thought about that too. Yeah. Like you're basically codifying, saying, look, you better go get gender affirming care before you turn 12 or 11. Like that's a pretty big decision to make as a 10-year-old or whatever, So I'm worried about that. And again, not from a competition standpoint. Like I think competitively, this does kind of seem to solve the problem. When kids are 8 or 9, boys and girls compete all the time together, but it seems like you're just that's a pretty heavy burden to put on somebody at 9, 10 years old. Like, hey, you got to do this. And some of this stuff may not be reversible. And so I worry about that from the welfare of the person who may believe that they're trans. Like people think a lot of things when they're 8, 9, 10 years old. That may not necessarily be the case when they're 21, 22. So I worry about it from that, but just kind of unintended consequence standpoint.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I thought about that too, that, by saying this, maybe you're unintentionally giving people an idea that they got to start, experimenting with this stuff even earlier in life, which again brings up another.
Or they'll face consequences, they'll face very real consequences.
And no, because we've done other discussions about this in prior shows where we do acknowledge, like, obviously society has agreed collectively that the age of 18 generally, except for drinking alcohol in the United States, but most other countries is 18 with alcohol as well. You can go to war at 18. You can get a tattoo.
You can start making your own decisions.
Correct.
You can start making your own
long-term
decisions for your own body.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So that's why, it does create a dilemma with, say 11 or 12-year-old that now is being told, if you do want to compete, if you're a boy and you want to be in the LPGA by the age of 25, then you got to get started changing now. And look, that's something that, we'll have to continue to work through as society. I don't have an answer for that because I tend to agree with our collective decision that kind of this 18 years of age is probably when we should allow, people to not be kids anymore and to begin to be able to start making decisions. Because I say that doesn't mean I'm anti-trans. I'm just saying this is a complex issue, right? And so and that's where I'm getting at as well is, for those of us like me and you and people that think like us, that you generally would want to see every individual's right protected in the United States. This is a messy issue because of everything we're saying. I also think with the trans community, sometimes I think, like, I would say it this way: you need to be a little bit patient, because you're bringing something to society that is also brand new. And think about it. We
Yeah.
joke about this sometimes too. We still can't even agree in this country about what the cause of the Civil War was, right? We've had integration for 60 years, and we still have issues and discussions in the country fighting about affirmative action and all this. So all these issues are very sensitive. And now we've thrown another log on the cultural fire of discussion in America, which is the the transgender log. And that's just another one that's being dealt with.
I would go even further than that. It's an interesting point. And you say, oh, okay, well, asking people to be patient for justice, so to speak, is kind of callous, which conceptually I understand. But I think, again, this can be distinguished in a way that we have a society that is built, not just ours, across the world. Like human societies are all based, for the most part, on the idea that gender is binary. Like that's kind of the construct on all these societies and all these cultures all around. And so if what the trans community brings to us is that gender is not binary, and if they support that, and they like, I'm willing to listen to anything, and I'm willing to, okay, this is my experience and understanding is this, but I'm always willing to look at new evidence, new information, and reconsider and everything like that. So, but the issue I think that we really face right now is that if societies around the world have been built on the idea that gender is binary. I mean, I guess it's beyond even human societies. You look at mammals and you look at sexual reproduction, anywhere where you have this like a male female type of thing. If it's built on, if you're going to push back on the idea that gender is binary, then I would think you have to understand that you can't then say, let's put this non-binary gender issue into the existing binary gender structures. Like, don't we need to change the structures to not be binary as well? And so that to me is the kind of, that's why I said a big ask earlier, is that, okay, you're telling me gender's not binary. Well, if that's the case, then why are you trying to fit this into a binary LPGA and PGA? Like that is a binary or set of organizations. That's binary, and so if gender isn't binary, then maybe we need to rethink how we do that, as opposed to just saying, hey, let's stick the trans women in with the women. Because it's like, well, hold on, we've already, if we're saying gender is not binary, then that shouldn't be, because that disadvantages the women.
It's interesting, man. Yeah. I'm sorry, you finished, because I don't.
No, I was going to say that what I was saying is that disadvantages the women assigned at birth, because of the information you just cited as far as what puberty does and so forth, and because of what we know for millions of years of human history as far as how your high end male and your median male performance wise athletically versus high end female and median female, and so if you're going to turn that over, then let's build something new altogether. Don't just put what that is into the existing structure.
Yeah, and as you're talking, it made me realize, because I appreciate what you're saying, it's basically like the opposite of eugenics when you're talking about this binary thing and trying to fit it into a society that already is set up with non-binary, I guess.
Well, no, it's the society is set up as binary.
Sorry, okay.
But if you're now these what's proposed or what's submitted is that it's not binary. And so then do we just fit the not binary into the binary system? Or do we have to figure out how do we create systems that account for the not binary?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, do you just create a transgender league and let people figure it out? And so, because I'm saying, like, think about eugenics. After colonialism, this idea pops up by the late 1800s that there's all these hierarchies in the human actual, like, makeup, but not just culturally, but actually from a DNA standpoint, that certain humans are better or smarter than others and more powerful and all that. That led to its natural conclusion, unfortunately, by 1945 with the end of the Second World War and the discoveries of the Holocaust. Right? If you believe that certain humans are inferior, the natural conclusion is going to be to try and exterminate all of them.
Because we're all competing for resources. Yeah, because we're all competing for resources. What
saved the world from eugenics continuing, not only was that horror and the horrors that were perpetrated before that time too, but it's also the fact that the scientific method, through facts, analysis, all that, disproved that idea. And no one can really prove scientifically that there's these huge differences in human groups. And so that was kind of forced to die on a vine in a sense. And I know people are trying to resurrect it today culturally, but they're not able to prove it. It's I guess the big lie in a sense. But
it's a cultural argument, not a science argument anymore.
Yeah, it's a cultural big lie. But this is different because this is almost like the opposite of that. People trying to bring in a topic and then trying to say, okay, well, we know that for most of human or all of human existence and what we see, like you said, in other biological creatures that are similar to us that have a male and female, it is non-binary and it always has been considered that way. Now we're going to try and tell you.
All right, I'm confused.
Okay.
It's non-binary, meaning it's not just male.
I keep confusing that. So meaning
you're confusing me.
People are trying to say that the gender thing
just from a biological thing, but just from a biological thing, like the idea of sexual reproduction versus asexual reproduction is like bacteria. It creates a replica of itself, and then that replica moves on. Sexual reproduction is you have a one gender and two gender binary, and then they combine to create an offspring. So that construct is a binary construct. And I'm not saying that anybody who says it's not binary is wrong. Like I'm interested to see, present the.
Well, that's what I was saying and thanks because you helped me get to where my brain was trying to go because I totally messed up the non-binary and binary. But basically, what I'm saying is the people that are critical of those who do research into things like how early is it healthy or not healthy to give a child hormones and things like that, they are like the opposite of they're similar to the eugenicists that they don't really want the scientific method and the people that actually can study this stuff looking too hard on it because, it may not jive with actually the ideology and the culture that they believe in. And so
remember, we did a show on that a few months ago about the people, the researchers. And again, these aren't politicians or talk show hosts or anything. There were researchers, scientists that were expressing fear that they didn't want to study this because they were worried if the results came back with something that maybe people were not happy about culturally, that they would get attacked and they would see that happen to their colleagues and so forth. We kind of need the scientific method here, to kind of do it. But I'll say this though, even if this ends up being a cultural thing and not a scientific thing, like I'm not saying you dismiss people then, it's if this is something in society that we're going to deal with, I'm not saying you got to prove it to me that this is 100% scientific, irrefutable, and all that. I'm saying that if you're going to try to say that the construct of society that we have now is wrong, you can't then also say that then let's take how we're saying it's different and force that into the existing structure. Like we should be talking about how do we account for everybody? How do we try to, or at least as many people as we can? Like I'm not saying turn your back on anybody. I'm just saying that. Let's not, in order to make this group happy, let's not violate or do something that's unfair to this other group that we created this whole division for, because again, like to foster competition and so forth. So it's just not as easy as it's not self-centered, basically. It's like, hey, how can we look at this holistically? Which back to the LPGA and USGA thing, I think that's what they're doing. I think that, again, this is constructive. And so I applaud it. Again, I'm just worried like, oh, well, that does create that. I'm always looking at what the incentives are. And so it's like, oh, well, that does mean that. So do you start having your talks with your child at 8 or 9? Like, hey, this is kind of what it's looking like here. Like they're still competing in co-ed sports then, depending on the sport, like 8, 9, 10 years old. Like, so yeah, it's just, the unintended consequences may be of concern, but again, I appreciate constructive solutions because honestly, with all of these societal things, we got to try stuff. It may or may not work. There may be unintended consequences, but that's how we learn and that's how we continue to improve. So doing nothing is not what I'm going to advocate for, but let's be constructive. Let's not just try to be exclude or to exclude or try to be mean. And so again, I applaud this and let's be honest. Let's evaluate and be honest and see what happens.
Yeah, you said, I know we want to wrap up, and you said something that actually made me, I want to say this though, because you just said something that made me appreciate that this subject, as much as it may not seem that way, what I'm about to say, I see a connection. It's kind of like religion. Because like we're saying that some people, I don't want to get in an argument about, trying to prove religious facts and all that, but right, some people they really believe literally everything in the Bible, all that happened Moses split the Red Sea. The bush did talk when it was burning, all that. Other people say, no, I don't believe it literally, but I still enjoy, I'm religious. I understand the allegories, all that, and I believe in God. And then other people say, I'm not religious at all.
And other people believe different things religiously. You believe totally different set of myths. But go ahead.
Correct. So we've created a society where we can all coexist generally. But think about what you're saying, right? We've created a society. It's okay. If you're Jewish, you got a synagogue over here. If you're Muslim, you got a mosque. If you're Christian, you got a church, all that. So what we're saying is the way that the trans thing is with sports now, the LPGA is saying it's almost like we want to respect everybody's religion in a sense. If you go to the synagogue, you're doing Jewish stuff. If you go into the mosque, you're doing Muslim stuff. You go to the church, you're doing Christian stuff. But I think we would all accept that it would be considered rude and not kind of just untoward type of thing if one of the three went to the other place of worship and tried to really start praying, like if the Muslim guy went into a church or a synagogue, put the prayer rug down right in the middle of the sanctuary of the other religion and started praying. I mean, people would be like, hey, dude, come on, man. We're not trying to offend your religion. You have a right to practice it, but you just came into our space and we have a right to not want this right here either. And I feel like it's the same thing that if women have someone who was a male just recently coming into their space to compete, they have a right too to say, hey, that might not be fair. And the reason I feel that way is,
and that's not necessarily saying you're against if the
correct. It's not discriminatory.
You're not saying, hey, I'm not against the Muslim person praying. It's just, is that the right?
That's what I'm saying is right, and that's what we're saying is people like you and I, we want trans people to have rights. They shouldn't be second class citizens. There shouldn't be a Jim Crow type of setup on trans. But I also feel like I played NCAA basketball. I was 6'4" by the time I was 15 years old in high school. So what happens is I was catching alley-oops and dunking a ball by 15, 16. In a different world, right? Maybe I would have decided I want to be a girl by the time I was 16 or 17. And let's say you start the hormone therapies and all that. I mean, would it be fair to consider that I should go right on a basketball court and play with girls? Because it's not about me at that point. What about the fairness to the girls that might not be able to compete with me? Yeah. That's all I'm saying about, also the trans community having that awareness that, a lot of people, this is not something that they're used to, and that there is a certain level of unfairness if a 15-year-old boy who's 6'4" and plays basketball and was good enough to play in college ends up saying, I want to be on the girls' high school basketball team, and the tallest girl is 5'9". That just gives an unfair advantage.
I thought you were going to go somewhere different when you were saying it. Like, I thought you were going to say, like, okay, and this is interesting. It popped into my head was, okay, so we have all these different religions. Imagine if we tried to create a society where you'd had to be in one religion or the other, and that's it. And it would
that's break. Called authoritarianism.
But it would break. It would break if there are 6 or 7 religions. Then we just have 6 or 7 religions. We're not trying to force them all into some binary or some construct just because that was there already, so to speak. And so I think that's really the thing. Like it's if we're going to expand our society's perception of gender, which again I can live with that if that's what we're going to do. But let's do that though. Let's not say we're going to expand it while staying in the existing construct. So ultimately, it's an issue. Like I said, I'm happy that they're doing this. And I think this will provide information for us to see how to continue to improve upon it and do it better. So ultimately, that's progress. And, this doesn't have to be the end. This can be the beginning of something. But again, it's constructive. It's not like mean or, purposeful, just trying to be, mean or exclusionary, anything like that. So it's helpful. I mean, so let's do it. Let's learn from it and, keep it moving. So I think we can wrap this topic and this show from there. We appreciate everyone for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk to you next time.